Well, hi everyone, it's Green Dragon here, and I am delighted to be joined by Stephen Gallagher, the composer for The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim. Hi, Stephen.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very well. I was going to say good morning, but I realize it's not good morning for you. It's good evening for you. We're on opposite sides of the world here.
We are. I'm sorry we didn't get to meet in person in London, but it's really nice to talk to you, and thank you
Well,
so much
I'm
for having me on.
I'm sure that is a pleasure deferred. I hope our paths will cross
I
some
hope
point.
so too.
I'm always looking for an excuse to come back and visit New Zealand. So,
Oh my goodness, come. You're always welcome.
the home of Middle Earth as it feels now. I mean, I know as someone in Britain, I shouldn't be saying that. That's sacrilege. Of
Well,
course, Britain is the home, but New
yeah,
Zealand
yeah.
does feel like it. Yeah.
Oh, I feel like we have a lot in common. So please, anytime you want to come over, you're more than welcome.
Oh, that's great. So, Stephen, War of the Rohirrim is about to come out officially. I know it's already released in some countries. Today is
Yes,
the official release date. Um, you were at the Wellington premiere, I believe,
hmm
this week. How was
that's right.
that?
That was great. It was a good time. I was a little nervous, as I was saying to you earlier. My daughter accompanied me to the screening, and she is by far the harshest critic I'm fortunate to have in my life. I was a little I was a little uneasy about how she would react to the film because this genre is not really her thing. But she admitted after the film, she said, "You know what, Dad, I wouldn't usually go and see this sort of thing, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great."
No, and that is good, a good comment, a good critique for I think many people, because it's one of the things that I've encountered in the fandom is quite a lot of people saying, "Well, anime is not normally my thing. This isn't
Mm,
really the kind of, I love Middle Earth. I love
yeah.
Tolkien. I
Mhm.
love Peter Jackson's vision of Middle
Yeah.
Earth." But
Yes.
anime is not really my thing. And I've been saying to people, just give it a go because
Yeah, right.
you
Yeah.
may be surprised. I think you quite quickly, it might sound foolish to say you forget that it's animated, but you're so quickly sucked back into that world that we know from Peter Jackson's movies
That's
and the
right.
characters and the tonality, both
Mm.
visually and in terms of the
Sonically.
audio,
Yeah.
that I think you do kind of, it becomes the same world. You don't keep thinking, yeah, but this is animated.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it's a little hard for me um to sort of see that. I when I was a child, I lived in Tokyo and I grew up with watching anime. So it's always been, something that I just uh um, not accepted, something that I've actually loved from a
Yeah.
very young age, and to sort of have an opportunity to work in anime, but also anime of Middle Earth. It feels like, well, these kind of like parts of one's life are sort of bookending into this sort of wonderful film. I mean, I know what you mean though. It's interesting. I think what you're saying is that the medium essentially seems to matter less, but then the story and the environment and the uh, sonic and visual language is compelling. And once you get over the fact that it's in a different medium than the original trilogy, um, it's a fun ride. I've certainly loved working on it, and I think Kamiyama is Kamiyama-san is brilliant. I loved working with him every single minute. So
So you were just saying, I feel like I'm going to dot around in there because I have questions, but I feel like I'm going to take them out of order because you just said that you grew up in Tokyo and that
yeah.
you were into anime already.
Mm, yeah.
Were you into Tolkien already? What's your background in Tolkien
No,
fandom?
I didn't really get into Tolkien until I was 11 years old, and the first introduction I had to it was uh, at school, oddly enough, and it was our teacher reading us The Hobbit, and I'd never read or heard about it before, and it was such a charming story, and I loved listening to the words. And then in confluence with that, our school had a computer lab with a text command game of The Hobbit, that we had to play, and you had to like type in text commands to navigate the world, and you had like sort of very very kind of rudimentary mid to late 80s computer graphics sort of coming up when
Yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
different environments. And then I sort of like I loved it, and I started reading The Lord of the Rings. And at the same time, I remember seeing the animated movie of Lord of the Rings and being really upset that it wasn't the whole film.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, I've reread the books, a couple of times as a teenager. Then obviously, fast forward, the films were released, and I remember seeing. It was the first thing I think I saw was the Khan reel with the Mines of Moria chase, which was like, oh my goodness. And look, New Zealand and especially Wellington being a somewhat sparsely populated place, like there's 5 million people in the country. So it basically means that most people in New Zealand know someone or who knows somebody who's worked on, at least one of the trilogies. And being in Wellington, you know lots of people who had a part in it. So it was really exciting, a really kind of vibrant time when those films were being made and then shot here, and their success was just really celebrated by, um, I think, everybody here. And then I had no idea that 10 years after the original films were released, that I would be working on the Hobbit trilogy, which was another.
Yeah, and tell us about that because you were music editor on
Yeah,
those movies, right? And so
that's right.
for sort of the uninitiated amongst us,
Mm-hmm.
what does that
Mm-hmm.
mean, being the music editor? I know that you
Mm-hmm.
wrote a little bit, though, like I believe Blunt
Right.
the Knives was your
Yeah. Yep.
tune.
That's right. Yep.
Um, but what does the music editing role involve?
Oh, I I mean, I was one of like a team of music editors, but in broad terms, it's probably a terrible analogy, but I sort of liken it to being a midwife. Like the sense that the creative act has already been sort of done between the director and the composer, and fundamentally your job is to make sure that it comes into the world in the intent intact, with the intent that the director and composer had, or the director has at that given moment. Um, you're basically responsible for all of the music in the film. Once the composer has composed the music and turned over everything, it is up to you to sort of keep it, uh, to fight for it,
Mhm.
to keep it intact against the slings and outrageous slashes of picture editorial. And yeah, you're there to help um, shepherd the score into the world in the best
Right.
possible
So
state that reflects the director's intent.
So when a beautiful through composed scene gets 35 seconds cut out of the middle of it,
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
go, what should we do musically there?
Exactly. Exactly. That's quite correct. How do we make that play? Yes.
And so, what is your training, Stephen? You know, obviously, music editing you worked, and
Mhm.
you're a composer.
Mhm.
Did you study music?
Mhm.
What was your background into this world?
Yeah, I mean, I studied music in high school. Um, I was uh, interested in music primarily because of rock bands, and primarily came to music because and rock bands because I gravitated towards the synthesizer when I was a kid. I was just like looking at this mysterious box with all of these buttons and making these otherworldly sounds, and I thought this is something that I would really like to, explore. I didn't have enough money for a synthesizer when I was a kid, but our high school had a really old um, Roland Juno 106, and every possible moment I could spend with that instrument, I did, and I tried to. I mean, I learned. I taught myself how to program, and I couldn't afford a synthesizer, but I could afford like books and manuals on synthesizers, and like I got in trouble in English class for reading synthesizer manuals instead of literature. Um, and then because because it was offered, I studied music through high school. The majority of the music that we were studying through high school was sort of like classic kind of Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, Brahms. I'm not sure if I can't remember if we did Stravinsky or not, but pretty much like 19th century, pre 20th century music. And as a teenager, I didn't feel like I had a way into that world. I
Yeah.
loved rock music and I loved the synthesizer, but I couldn't. I felt really locked out of the classical, Western European tradition because, um, when you're analyzing and you're getting taught that material, it's obvious that it's brilliant and created by genius minds. And I'm not a genius mind. And I was like, I mean, I can't make anything like this because you have to be a genius to do
Mm.
it. And I couldn't relate to a lot of it. And it all changed really when my music teacher played us some music written in the 20th century. I still remember this feeling. She put on this cassette, and this sound came out of the speakers, and it felt like the rest of the world just disappeared and vanished. And it was like being alone and with something absolutely beautiful and terrifying at the same time. And that music was a piece by George Crumb. And as soon as I heard that, it 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 was like, oh right, all of the fascination I have with synthesizers and making sounds is manifested in what this person is doing with music in line with the Western classical tradition. And this feels like a door opening. And if people are doing this and it's possible, then that's what I want to do. So I went to university and studied music composition there. Um, yeah, that's that's
And the
the
rest
history.
is history.
Well, the rest is a bit murky, but yeah.
Yeah, because we all know it's so easy to make a career in music. Once you study, you just go and it just happens. Yeah.
just
Yeah.
like just like that, right? Yeah.
All
And I mean,
right.
and then yeah.
So fast forward and you're working at Park Road and you're music editing on the Hobbit movies, which must have been very exciting.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah, having been a Tolkien fan, and then
Yeah.
now you find yourself working on something that entails two of your passions, anime and Tolkien. So that must have been, I know
Oh,
I've talked to Jason DeMarco who said, I feel like I was made for this because
yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah,
anime, it's
yeah,
Tolkien, it's like,
yeah.
did you have similar feelings?
I did. I absolutely did. Very, very excited. Um, and I think because I got sent the script first when I was talking with Philippa and Phoebe Gittins and Deepak Giorgio, Philippa Boyens, of course. And I read the script and I was just so thrilled, so excited. And then Kamiyama-san, Kenji Kamiyama, the film's director, sent me some concept artwork that his team had put together. And that, like, those two things were just like, it was so exciting. It was like, I can't believe this is happening. This is amazing. And then that was sort of followed by a somewhat terrifying dread. that, oh, they want the music to be in the world of the original trilogy, and that's like some of the best film score ever written. So that's at that time it felt like quite a shadow. It still feels, um, a pretty intimidating privilege.
Big shoes to fill.
Huge, huge, beautifully constructed shoes to fill. Yeah.
Well, and so let's talk about that because obviously
Mm.
you were familiar with Howard Shore's music, more than
Yes.
familiar with through
Yes.
your editing work.
Yes.
One of the things that I particularly enjoyed watching the War of the Rohirrim is how there were all these moments of these familiar themes, but it's its own world as well. But it very much, oh look, oh I hear that, and it draws us back into a world that we know. Um, how did you go about choosing what you would use, which themes you would take that were already there, and then how you would sort of knit that into your own ideas and themes?
Oh, that's a great question. And something we discussed and thought about a great deal and continually discussed all throughout the process. Um, the fact that we were privileged enough to be able to use those was just like, oh, wow, incredible. Great responsibility too, though, because we didn't want to just pepper the entire film with Howard's themes for the sake of it. We wanted to use everything respectfully and really where it fitted. Obviously, the Rohirrim theme was kind of a no brainer because that the entire um, film sort of revolves around the fulcrum of the Rohirrim culture.
Hmm.
So, and that's such a great piece of music. Oh my goodness. So that was we were clearly going to use that. Um, on the soundtrack, but not in the film, we used the Gondor theme as well as an iteration of the Gondor theme, and that's because at that particular moment when we recorded it, there was a sequence where Frila, Olwen, and Leif go to rescue Hera. Um, and originally, when we scored it, there was like this big reveal of Orthanc. Camera pans down Orthanc. And so we thought, oh, well, we should have the Gondor theme to sort of acknowledge that Orthanc sort of wrapped up in Gondor's kind of world. The film sort of got re-edited, and that theme didn't really seem appropriate to the way that sequence unfolded. But we kept it on the soundtrack because we wanted to release everything we did. Um, the ring theme, every single one of those of the films in the trilogy starts with the ring theme, and we're like, oh, it'd be so cool to start the film like that. I mean, just to acknowledge that that we're sort of nodding towards the trilogy. What else did we use? Oh, we used the nature theme as well, and that's basically at the end of the film when Olwen and Hera are about to ride out of Eridas, and Hera shows Olwen the invitation that she's got from a certain wizard. Uh, we thought that that theme would be just a little hint of it would be a nice nod to to said wizard. Um, yeah, but I mean, all up, I mean, there's 2 hours of music in the film, and if we take Howard's themes, the themes that we used, and put them back to back, that sort of is between 3 and 4 minutes of music. So the rest I wrote, you know, trying to be deeply respectful of the music that Howard made in collaboration with Peter Jackson. But also fundamentally, my job is to serve the film that I'm working on. Kenji Kamiyama's animation, and there's just different visual information and
Yeah.
story information that we get. But broadly speaking, in anime, there's different visual information that we get from characters, creatures, places, and there's information we're not getting as well. Like in live action, there's a lot more body language, subtle movements that as humans we're sort of most of us are, inherently aware of and inherently aware that maybe an eyebrow raise or a certain body movement or expression can really bring an emotional subtext to a scene that colors the language or colors the meaning differently. And you don't really get that too much in anime. So in that respect, music has a little bit more of a role to play in helping those sort of things. Camera moves are different. It's animation, and it's obviously based on the design that was inherent throughout the original trilogy, but it's rendered in a different medium, and therefore I think the music, the harmony, and the rhythm and the color all need to fundamentally serve that sort of vision.
That's really interesting because one of the things that I noticed, even watching a screener on my laptop, which doesn't have the greatest audio, um, and which a lot of my colleagues in the fandom have, when I've been reading their reviews and their opinions on
Yeah.
this film, the sound design is
Mm,
something that has been commented on a lot.
mm, mm.
And it's so interesting. It's sort of course, in Peter Jackson's original trilogy, the sound world is phenomenal. Howard
Hmm.
Shore's music is spectacular, as we've just talked
Yes, it
about.
is.
But there's something about this movie where the
Mm,
sound design is so rich
mm.
and so integral to the storytelling. And I hadn't realized until you just said it just now that that's partly because that is filling in
Mm.
cues that we are
Hmm.
not getting from minute facial
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
expressions or body
yeah.
language. The sound world
Hmm.
is doing some of the lifting that
Yeah,
might be done
absolutely.
visually in
Yeah,
a live action
absolutely.
film.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, 100%. Yeah,
And
and
so,
you know,
so when you're composing
mm,
for an animated film like this, um, do you have an awareness of sound design within that as well? You know, it all seems to meld so well together in the
huh.
movie. And I've also been playing with the I think it's called Ambient Worlds that
Yes, ambient
was
world.
released, which is
Love that.
so fun. I've been doing my dishes with Metacelled in the background, you know.
Oh, I love this. It's
And
like
again,
my Brian Eno obsession, and this again book ending. I love those ambient things. It's fantastic. I don't know whose idea it was, but thank you.
it's
Great.
great, and
But
you've got
yeah,
sort of
you're right.
the
Yeah,
crackling
the
of the
crackling of the
fire
fire.
and the, you know.
So good.
So
So
do
good.
you does that play any part in your consideration when you're composing that the
Yes.
sort of sound design of the world in
Yes.
addition to the music?
Yes, absolutely. And I think I can give you an example of that being, and I'm not sure if this is a spoiler-free interview or not, but okay, well, let me see how I can put it.
Don't give too much away, but I'll wait
Okay,
a couple of days to put this out and
okay, oh,
warn
cool.
people.
Well,
We'll warn
let's
people.
let's okay, I get it. I appreciate it. Let's just say, for example, hypothetically speaking, if there was, say, a large creature resembling an elephant, but not quite an elephant, a lot scarier than an elephant. If there was such a thing on screen that suddenly appeared, fundamentally from a music point of view, you know that something that big is going to make a huge noise and uh, is going to take up audio real estate. Um, where and in terms of like placing musical elements around that, you just want to be a little mindful. I try to be a little bit mindful of how much giving the sound to something like that
Some
respect it
room.
deserves. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, also likewise, if we're talking about the Rohirrim, and one of the things that's sort of like inherent about that culture is horses, right? So if you've got 200 horses galloping along a battlefield, that's that's a very loud sound. It's a very loud series of sounds. It's like a stochastic event, right? Lots of hooves hitting at different rhythms and armor and all of that stuff. So I try to make musical decisions that mean that the sound that needs to be there because you're seeing it on screen, that the music somehow can coexist with that and serve the emotional intent that the director has desires. You absolutely do, um, had keep an awareness of sound design and sound design requirements when you see things like that. It is a little hard at first in anime, I'd have to say, because unlike live action, you don't really see the final shot immediately.
Mm.
The first thing I saw of the Rohirrim was largely just charcoal drawings. I mean, they were beautiful, like sort of like Mark Chagall or something like that. Lovely,
Yeah.
but you don't really get an idea of the idiosyncratic parts of what you're supposed to be seeing. So often, musical decisions that we made were sort of revisited and refined once the picture sort of coalesced a little more. and we saw more detail, and we saw, the size or the density of creatures or events.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That that's so fascinating because, my world outside of Tolkien fandom is primarily in the opera business. And,
nice.
there the sort of sound design that you're talking about
Mm.
is all going to be in the composer's score, generally
Yes, yes,
speaking.
yes, absolutely.
Modern
Yeah,
opera may be a little different,
different.
but
Yeah,
generally speaking, if you want to hear the thundering hooves of 200 horses, that's going to be in the
yes,
composer's
yeah,
music.
yeah,
Whereas you have to
yeah.
leave space for that
That's right. Yeah,
with it.
yeah. I can go and have a cup of tea. I don't have to. I don't have to worry about that.
That's amazing, though. I'd never really realized that distinction.
It's a really. I mean, the more you're aware of it, the more you see some really interesting and brilliant work done by sound designers and across all medium. But on this film, lucky enough to have the Brent Burge, who one of the greatest sound effects editors in the world, who has been. You'll find his name all through all of the trilogies, all through lots of incredible films. Matt Stutter, Hayden Collar. We have such a great team of sound people and really inventive, um, dedicated sound editors. And I think some of their sound effects may have come from their libraries that they designed for the first trilogy and the Hobbit trilogy. There's some sort of signature sounds just because you're back in the environment
Yeah,
of Edoras and Meduseld and things like that. There are sounds that were established in the first trilogy that we want to keep a continuum of
yeah,
in the War of the Rohirrim.
yeah. Wow, that makes me think of, I'm going down a bit of a rabbit hole here, but that makes me
Love
think
it,
of
love it. Let's go.
um, seeing a documentary when I was a kid for Empire Strikes Back,
I
and
saw that. I
with the
loved
guy
that.
like hitting a hammer on wires
Yeah,
to
on
make the
the
blaster
pylon.
sound.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
hitting
yeah,
that, and it
yeah,
goes doosh, doosh down the wire, and
yeah.
it's like, oh, that's a
Ben
blaster sound.
Ben Burt and yeah,
Right,
yeah, man.
right. Now, and if you've got
Rad.
that in your archive, when you
Yeah.
revisit the Star Wars world, you
Exactly.
that sound effect. So
100%. 100%. Yeah,
yeah,
totally. Exactly. Thematic continuity. Yes.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Now talking about themes that came from Howard Shore's music and that we hear in this movie, and shout out here to one of our other staffers, Demosthenes, who is,
Hey.
yeah, very active on
Yeah.
the Discord, and
Yeah.
and I said to him I was going to be chatting with you, and I was like, what questions do
Yeah.
you have?
Oh,
And this is
awesome.
partly from one of his questions, but he was asking about the difference, maybe different considerations when you have voices that are communicating part of the emotion musically versus instrumental. And we have the lament for Helm,
Oh man.
which of course, I believe it's Lorraine Ashbourne
It is.
singing it,
Yes.
right? And she is
Yes.
just so great in this movie. Um, but it's
Man.
how much of that overlaps with the lament for Theoden, because
Mm,
we recognize it, and I
mm.
love that it's kind of like, oh, this is obviously an ancient lament that is in the Rohan culture
That's right. That's
handed
right.
down,
That's right.
so that when Eowyn sings it in the funeral
Exactly.
scene for
Mm,
Theodred,
mm.
um that it's second nature to her.
Exactly. Yeah, it's inherently part of her culture. It's a ritual that's practiced, and yeah, exactly that. Exactly that. That it's a cultural touchstone, a tenet. Um, and that was certainly the idea, the ideology going into that. I was in the room when Lorraine recorded that. It was amazing. It was chills.
Yeah, yeah,
Actually, yeah. Yeah, a little tear inducing actually, to be honest with you as well. It's
yeah. And
but
so,
yeah, that's it. That's a cornerstone of the culture, I think.
yeah.
Is the,
And so, is there a difference, ignoring for a moment
mm,
words specifically, because, we don't necessarily understand the words that I know
right,
David
yeah,
Sarlo
yeah.
translated to create the lament. We, as a viewer, may not
Mm,
understand the words.
mm.
What's the difference for you in how a voice creates emotion musically and
Mm.
how an instrument, a non-vocal
Mm.
instrument,
Mm, mm,
creates
mm.
emotion musically. Is there a
It's a
difference,
really,
or is it?
yeah, I think so. I think so. That's a really great question. So there are similarities and there are differences. Fundamentally, right? Uh, Most of the dialogue in the film is, well, when I watched it and when I worked on it, was in the English language. So primarily, there's a language-based approach to expressing, you know, emotion or ideas or thoughts, right? And then there are tenets of that language that we understand to mean certain things within a context
Mhm.
or a cultural context. Um, so there's that, as a baseline. But then if you think about different stresses or different pitches on words, these can be used to sort of underscore emotional subtext or emotional meaning. Um, but in terms of the difference between that and instrumentation, instruments in some respects are giving you audio information that's a little bit more abstract. Um, and again, it sort of depends on the context in which they're operating or sounding, um, both in dramatic context and also in harmonic, rhythmic, you know,
Mhm.
coloration context as well. So, I mean, my thinking on terms of instruments is that, say I play an A on the piano, right, and maybe if you just hear that by itself, it's like could mean anything, right? But if you put a context or a harmonic context around it, it can either weight it to something that's tragic,
Mhm.
heartbreaking, heavy, or it can weight it to something sort of jubilant
Mhm.
and, like sky punchingly enthusiastic, depending on the notes that play along with it, instruments that play along with it. And in terms of emotion, in terms of emotion in music and in film, it's like really the chemistry, I guess, between what we're seeing visually, um, the the emotional intent of a specific scene can help. I don't know. There's some sort of alchemy between picture and sound sometimes that can give you an emotional punch from the things that you kind of least expect, right? Um, so in both instances, it's really context driven. But for the example, I know we were just talking about Lorraine. There's a part in that song where, yeah, I don't understand the lyrics, right? I mean, I do have the translation, but I can't think of it off the top of my head. But in the last stanza of the voice she sings, as the camera moves over the assembled throng of, mourners, that she just hits this note and it slightly breaks. And when she did that in the ADR recording studio, I mean, I almost just like wept. It just felt like something had just, you hear the sound of someone sort of just breaking.
Mm.
And I guess that's because in the context of what she was singing over, there's a funeral happening. Um, and I don't know. I mean, like I find like, if you listen to something like, music's a great sort of non-verbal audio information source, right? And with put that together with with language that you might not understand, for example. Um,
Mhm.
and I think sort of like context is a really really important thing to grasp, because like I could listen to, say, something like Serge Gainsbourg and be awfully moved by, you know something like Bella de Melody Nelson, or I don't speak French very well at all, but yeah, every time I hear it, I'm like, oh man, yeah. Oof. Um, Sorry, I'm really rambling here. I feel like I've lost the train of thought. But
Yeah.
fundamentally, I think the two things in common are context, and the difference in instruments and voice. Fundamentally, the voice is basically the greatest instrument known to mankind. It can do anything, whereas when you're writing for instruments, they have very limited comparative ranges of what they can do. So on one hand, the voice is an incredible instrument capable of, you know, mind-bending sonic expression, and we're using a group of instruments that each is sort of limited in its range, but you exploit those limitations, and in the sort of grander scheme of the orchestra and orchestration and color choices, you can make kind of infinite combinations to serve any kind of emotional, um, dramatic context.
Yeah.
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 I'm not sure if that answers the question
No, it
succinctly.
does.
I
But and
apologize.
as you were answering it, it sort of also illuminated for me, thinking back to when you were talking about visual cues that we're
Mm,
used to reading, body
mm,
language, facial expressions. I think also perhaps music that includes the human voice resonates with listeners in a different way because
yeah, because that's us.
we spend our lives
Mm,
reacting
mm-hmm,
to audio cues from human voices and
mm-hmm,
knowing
mm-hmm,
that a break in the voice
mm,
often means a certain kind of emotion, knowing that a timbre, that
mm,
a certain resonance, a certain
yeah,
lack of resonance
mm-hmm,
can represent different emotions, and
yeah.
we're constantly listening out for those cues.
We are, and I feel like I absolutely agree with you. I think you're really right, and I would link that back to our evolution. In terms of like, as storytellers, there's going to be things that audio information from fellow humans that have like a deep resonance from tens of thousands of years ago. Um, there's inflections in different cultures that have significant emotional meaning. Like in New Zealand, when you hear a waiata, um, or a karanga, which is um, someone calling you onto, say, a marae, a meeting
Uh-huh.
place,
Yep.
that has a really, like, for me as a New Zealander, hearing that has an absolutely huge emotional resonance.
Yeah.
I might not understand I'm just kind of at the beginning with my Tadeo journey, so I don't really understand all of what I'm hearing, but I can, without a doubt, tell you that from note one to the very end, it's like a sonic
Yeah.
punch
Yeah.
and hug to your soul.
It's an emotional resonance,
Yeah, yeah, it really, really
as
is
well as the.
undeniable.
Yeah, yeah. And so that leads me on very nicely talking about cultural resonances. And you were talking at a beginning of this conversation about, yes, it's sort of Peter Jackson's vision of Middle Earth, but
Mm,
it's now Kamiyama-san's vision of Middle Earth through
yeah,
anime. And I'm
yeah.
fascinated by things like, for example, the taiko, I believe it's called, the
Oh,
drum
yeah, the taiko.
that you
Yeah,
use. So
yes,
so there are bits where you're leaning into
yeah.
that Japanese
Mm-hmm,
aesthetic and
mm-hmm,
sound
mm-hmm.
world. Talk to us a
Yes.
little bit about that, if you will.
Okay. Absolutely. So the taiko is obviously,
By the way, I love that you've just shifted to reveal an award just behind your shoulder there. That's great.
oh, this whole thing. Oh, yeah. Sorry about that.
No, I
Uh,
love it. I love it. I would do the same if I
all
could.
right. Yeah, that's pretty subtle, eh? Hey. Um, what about that? Um, uh, you know, firstly, it, one of the things, I kind of wanted to be careful of going into this before I saw any of the visuals was cultural appropriation.
Of course.
So, but when you see a taiko drum in front of you and there are like a whole field of taiko drummers and people playing percussion, it's like, okay, well, it looks like we're doing this, right? And visiting Kamiyama-san in Tokyo, we talked about the taiko. We talked about its role in Wolf's army as a sort of like a unifying call to arms, um, and a powerful sort of like message to the troops, but also to sort of send fear through the people that they were fighting. In this case, it's the Rohirrim. We went to a taiko museum in Japan, which was amazing, and just like got to try all the different taiko drums and sort of got to sort of experiment with the type of drums that we, we might have the opportunity to use. And Kamiyama-san sort of went further. He was like, well, there's other Japanese percussion that if you are interested in using it, you should do it. He was really into, uh, exploring the gagaku and kabuki kind of theater tradition from Japan, which is like a really rich, dramatic, and percussive, uh, threaded music, style. So while we were there, we went to the taiko museum, experimented with taiko instruments, with gagaku, with kabuki instruments, and we were lucky enough to find this incredible duo of percussionists in London, Joji and Eri, um, who were Japanese, who pulled up outside the studio in London with this van load of just instruments. And, we all helped move them up the stairs into the studio and then unpack them all. It was like sort of percussion Christmas. And we set them all up, and, Eddie and Joji played the different combinations. And then uh, I'm a really big fan of a Japanese composer called Toru Takamitsu, and one of my favorite things that he's done is a soundtrack to a film called Ran. And I was like, when I was in touch with Joji, I was sending him like examples of the opening suite of Ran. And there's some percussion in there. I was like, something like this, something that sounds like this, something sort of like punctuation through the music. And he bought just this grab bag of amazing stuff, which he demonstrated. He was so generous. And then he was like, you sent me a Toru Takamitsu piece as a reference. And I was like, yeah, he's one of my favorite composers. He's like, I work with him. I was like, I was like, can I get your autograph? Um,
Yeah.
so we found some instruments that we thought would be, I mean, taking them from a theatrical tradition already means that, applying them to a different medium that is essentially a dramatic, uh, storytelling medium. We had an inkling that they would be suitable. It was basically like the um, kind of like almost two, I guess what we call claves, or clapping sticks, right?
Mhm.
These things that give sort of punctuative, uh, percussive, uh, underscore for tension and motor rhythm, and also these amazing sort of Japanese bells that just sound so incredible, so beautiful. And these bowls that Joji bowed just kept a continual drone, like bowing these beautiful bowls that was just like mind blowing, sitting in the control room listening to this going on. And then the thing that actually blew my mind is that he had a Japanese gong that looked almost like a bottom half of a barbecue. Like,
Ah,
hey, we're doing the session, then we're going to go and have a cookout. But he hit it and he spun it round. And the way that Mark Wilshire, amazing producer of music, super producer, music mixer, music engineer, recorded it was that. So when it spun in the control room, it sounded like this whole thing was moving around your head. So we found these absolute like treasure trove of incredible sounds, and we threaded them through the film. I mean, I think we probably used them reasonably sparingly, but in the spirit of Howard Shore and his amazing timbral imagination, his amazing, threading of unusual instruments into a Western European orchestra. In that tradition, we felt like, and with the encouragement of Kamiyama-san, we felt like taking these elements from a traditional Japanese theater music accompaniment was a good thing to do. It certainly, he was happy, and we certainly were thrilled to do it.
well, it sounds like you got a couple of amazing artists to
Oh, they
perf
are.
perform
They
that music for
absolutely
you.
are. Yeah, no, they absolutely were. So taiko was really the jumping off point. Seeing the taiko on the screen was the jumping
Yeah.
off point into using and utilizing more Japanese style percussion.
Yeah, that kind of opened a door and
It
gave a
did, yeah.
permission.
Yeah, well, it opened the door, and then Kamiyama-san really sort of said, "Come on in, let's look around."
Yeah,
Yeah,
brilliant.
very
And
happy. He's a
and
great
I
director.
noticed also, for what was intriguing to me was your use of crumhorn in the piece. Um,
Yeah.
I used to back in the day.
What
I used to
did
play in an
you?
early music ensemble, and yeah, a long time ago. And I primarily just
Right,
played different recorders. But the woman who ran
right,
the early music ensemble had a whole bunch of different crumhorns that she would bring to rehearsals, and we would just have so much fun with them. Um, you
excellent,
know, for
excellent.
and to me that immediately takes us into a kind of Anglo-Saxon sound world. I mean, it
Yeah,
often feels very Tudor to me, but earlier
yeah,
as
for sure.
well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah, for sure.
was that the idea in the same way
Well,
that,
yeah.
Japanese music has a
Hmm.
cultural resonance, the
Hmm.
crumhorn has this kind of historical cultural resonance.
It certainly does. And actually, you're quite right. We were trying to design both a musical, harmonic, and timbral characteristic for the Dunlending culture, which has, raised Frecker, raised Wolf, and raised General Targ. Like, we wanted to give them a characteristic of their own culture. Um, so we looked at the Rohirrim and the Dunlending relationship and how the Dunlending culture just felt a little less refined than the Rohirrim. Um, so we wanted to, yeah, something, we wanted to imbue their music with something that felt a little ancient but a little unstable at the same time, if that makes sense, but also colored the sort of lower woodwind range. So we found Jude and Emily on YouTube, because when we were like, researching, well, looking up different instruments and trying to listen to their sound. YouTube is a wonderful resource. And yeah, we found Jude and Emily, and we're like, well, these people seem amazing. So we got in touch with them. And we, yeah, we met them in London. They came and recorded, and they were honestly so great. It was such an amazing day. They are so good, and so patient, but so generous. Like, I learned so much from them, and what we were asking them to do sometimes was out of the range of the instrument, and they were so patient in terms of retuning, and I loved it. And basically, what that did, you're quite right. Those instruments are sort of, late medieval, early Renaissance period instruments. And in the case of the crumhorn, it's not a very sophisticated reed instrument. It's basically like there's not much dynamic range. It's either on or it's off.
Mhm.
Yeah. But it adds this wonderful earthy texture to the winds and gives the sort of the music around the Dunlendings quite a character. And also with that, we doubled some of the trumpet lines on shawms, which are also an old ancient reed instrument. And for that Dunlending or the Freco Wolf Targ music, really gives it a quite a different tonal character. And then for the more kind of extreme events, we used the Rush fife, which wasn't an instrument I was aware of before, but my goodness, it's fantastic. So these specialty wind instruments played by Emily and Jude were, just gave again a sort of an earthier, ancient flavor to the Dunlending music culture, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
there were bits that made me think of is it the Carnix? Was that the sort of
Yeah,
ancient
yeah. Carnux, the
Roman
ancient. Yep, yep.
battle trumpet? Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah.
We did some brass recordings, some wild brass recordings to sort of mimic that as well, which you hear later in the film as the siege tower is rising up, and you see the Dunlending sort of
Yep.
like, like, the soldiers kind of blowing these horns, and yeah, exactly, yeah, that's exactly where we're coming from on that as well. Something ancient and feels like it's grown out of the earth. Something sort of, um, earthy but unsettling.
Well, Stephen, I feel like we could go on talking forever, and I do not want to
I'd
take
love to.
I don't want to take up too much of your evening.
Ah, no, no,
Um,
no, no. Okay.
but I do want to ask you, so War of the Rohirrim is sort of officially out now,
It's
and
officially out. Yeah.
we hope that people will go and experience this incredible visual world and this incredible sound world that has been created to tell this story. Um, what's next? Obviously, you're in Wellington, and we
Hmm.
obviously as fans are all very interested in a project that we know Phoebe and Artie are hard at work writing. We know that
Oh,
Andy is
right.
out there.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
are, are you at all lured into the world of the hunt for Gollum? Or
I mean, I haven't heard anything. I'd love to do it. Yeah, I mean, look, maybe you can write to them and ask. No, I mean, I look, I don't know.
I'll
I
give
haven't
you a
really.
recommendation.
If you could, I would really appreciate it. I mean, provided I pass the audition. No, in all honesty, that would be a dream. I'd love to. But I haven't heard anything, and I think um, anyone's first choice for this would obviously be Howard Shaw, right? Because that's ultimately, I think, I speak for for most people.
As a
Uh,
fan.
yeah, as a fan, that's the guy you want to write that score, right? Ideally. Um, so let's see how it goes. I mean, I would love to do it, but ultimately, as a fan, uh, you know, that's the guy you want, right? Howard
Well,
Shaw.
but
He's
you have
a
demonstrated that you can live in that sound world and expand it to be your own
oh,
sound
thank you,
world and
thank you.
expand it to include all these different cultural references in the sound world. And, it's quite an achievement, I would say.
That's a really that means a great deal. Thank you so much. I really
Well,
have to say that it's been so incredible doing on this journey. I have to really give a huge shout out to you and everybody at the One Ring. You've been so supportive and so lovely. Um, and I don't feel like I love everything you said. It really means a great deal, but I really feel like this is not my thing. It's like it belongs to the fans, and I'm just lucky enough to have a part of it. And it means a great deal to me to be involved in this. It's been a real daunting privilege, and I thank you so much.
well, thanks for taking the time today, Stephen, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Kirsten, thank you.